So I will go on to introduce our first author, who is Corban Addison. Corban holds degrees in law and engineering. After completing a federal clerkship, Addison began his career specializing in corporate law and litigation. He is also an internationally best-selling author of 4 novels: A Walk Across the Sun, The Garden of Burning Sand, The Tears of Dark Water, and A Harvest of Thorns, all of which address some of today's most pressing human rights issues. An attorney, activist, and world traveler, he lives in Virginia with his wife and children. Corban, thank you so much for joining us here today.
A real pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you for the honor of getting to address this audience. So I have the privilege of being the father of a teenager. My son Samuel is 15, and he's a voracious reader. He's first year in high school, but he's already looking toward college, and he read Wastelands to his credit. And I asked him as soon as I got this invitation, I said, Samuel, what would you say to to college professors and administrators about what Wastelands might say to your generation? And he thought about that for a minute, and he said, well, it's about race in kind of an unusual way, kind of environmental racism, and it really says something about the way that we feed ourselves, this strange industrialized agriculture that has so many costs for humans and the environment. But then he paused and he said, really, Wastelands is about change. It's about how the world can change, and also about how any of us, even young people, can be a part of that change. And I laughed and I said, Samuel, do you want to do the call for me? I mean, in reality, it was a perfect answer. And I think he nailed it. I mean, as a dad thinking about his generation, so he's 15, he's on the tail end of Gen Z. I've been watching their generation because I'm a student of social change, having written numerous books about injustice around the world. And I love how passionate young people are about the problems in the world and about how to fix them. But I've been really saddened to see the way that so many young people in my son's generation have grown almost pessimistic about the state of the world, to the point where a lot of them just get angry and feel like there's no chance that the world can be can change, or that they could have any part in it. They really just feel like, in many ways, we, their elders, have failed them, and they don't know what to do. So what do they do? I mean, I see it with so many of my son's friends, even my daughter's friends. She's 12. I mean, they get online, and they're very online, and they get loud on social media. And if there's an event or a march, they'll happily, in fact, with great vigor and enthusiasm, show up. And I love that. I mean, I love any way in which young people use their voice and their feet to make their values heard. And yet at the same time, as a student of social movements and change, I recognize that that's not actually the way that the world changes, not in any durable fashion. I mean, to really change the world, short of a revolt or revolution, you actually need to get a diverse group of multi-talented and passionate individuals to come together around a common cause and learn how to use the levers of power in existing institutions to move the world in a new direction. Change really requires courage and commitment. It requires perseverance across time, and it requires community, a community and a coalition of people who won't give up until actually the world moves, until it changes. What's so cool about Wastelands as a story is that it really follows that map. It is, in many ways, a kind of narrative blueprint of social change, just like my son said. It's a story of a community of hundreds of rural people, most of them Black people of modest means, in eastern North Carolina, many of them tracing their ancestry on this land back to Reconstruction and even beyond that to the days of slavery. Many of their ancestors acquired this land after they were emancipated. And these folks have seen their land despoiled by large-scale agriculture, particularly one company, a multi-billion-dollar multinational company that provides much of the world's bacon, Smithfield Foods, across a generation. They've watched this happen. They have struggled together. They have built grassroots organizations. They have lobbied their legislators in the state house, their local and even federal officials. They have moved the needle with activism and with their voice. But it wasn't really until the early 2010s, around 2012, 2013, that they realized that in order to really change this industry that owned the legislature, that had so much money and power, they needed to find lawyers to take their case to court. They were fortunate because a lawyer by the name of Mona Lisa Wallace from the small town of Salisbury, her hometown, she had made her career, built a career around taking the impossible cases, the underdog cases, and going up against the corporate behemoths, the Goliaths, over the course of years and humbling them. She heard about the community's story and decided to take it on, no matter the cost. She allied herself with this beautiful community of people who had been advocating for themselves for, like I said, at that point, about 20 years. And they brought suit against Smithfield. They brought 26 federal lawsuits in what's called a mass action in Eastern North Carolina. They brought 5 of those to trial, and against every conceivable odd, against death threats and witness intimidation in the community, against an industry that nearly scuttled the lawsuits by changing the law in the legislature in midstream. They managed to convince 60 unanimous jurors over the course of 2 years of trial, and then a conservative panel of justices or judges on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, that their claims were not only legal, but just. In fact, one of the verdicts was the largest verdict in the history of North Carolina. And it actually forced an industry that had promised never to settle and never to change. It actually forced them to change their business practices. Wastelands is, like my son said, it's about a lot of hot button, important issues that we're dealing with in society today, from environmental racism to corporate malfeasance and political corruption, and even the consequences, social and environmental, of our food system. But in addition to that, it's really an incredibly inspiring story of ordinary people who came together and fought for a long time, never giving up until they managed to change the world. And when I think about, as a dad, what kind of entree my kids will eventually get when they enter college, and I think both of my kids will, my son's certainly looking forward to it. My daughter is as well. She's 12. I mean, what kind of message they get when they get to college. My hope is that the very first thing, or one of the first things that they hear, and hear then frequently and often, from professors and administrators, from everyone really in the collegiate environment, is, college isn't just about getting a degree and making your way in the world and finding a good career and, becoming financially self-sufficient and perhaps even, well off in the long run. I mean, all that's great, but really college is the gateway to a journey of discovery that is life itself. And in fact, inspiration really should be at the heart of the college experience from beginning to end, to ask questions of ourselves about who are we and what are our gifts and talents and how can we contribute to the world? And is it possible for us, as Gandhi said, to be the change that we hope to see in the world? I'm not going to say that my book will move the needle in every heart, But I think that having spoken to a lot of young people across time, and including just a couple of days ago at Wake Forest Law School, I've really spoken to a lot of young folks about the power of story, and many stories to move our hearts and change the way we see the world, and even inspire us to consider, how we can be a part of that change. I actually had an experience like this when I was a college student. I read A Civil Action, Jonathan Harr's masterpiece of narrative nonfiction about a big environmental litigation. And I remember thinking at the end of that book, you know what? I hadn't really considered going to law school before that, but I thought, man, I might like to be a lawyer like that. It was a book. It wasn't the only thing, but it was certainly a book that put a face on and a heart to the possibility that I ultimately decided to pursue that path. My path followed directly on those heels. So I commend to you Wastelands for all the reasons that my son so astutely pointed out. It really is a blueprint of social change, but fundamentally it's an inspiring story about how all of us, including young people who may otherwise be really despairing of the world, can be a part of making the world a better place for all of us. Thanks so much.